Hey all you whiskey fans, I recently got to meet Joe Clark, the whiskey director at Filey Bay, and specifically talked to them a lot about their IPA special cask release. It was pretty interesting. Grab a glass, let's talk about it. For those of you which don't know Filey Bay, they are a little distillery, only been around for a couple years now, based out of Yorkshire. This is in the UK. I travel to Manchester a lot, a little bit east and quite close to the coast. And what I found quite interesting when speaking to Joe is learning not only about the distillery, the whiskey that they're creating, but everything else which is happening by the family. What I mean by the family is actually Filey Bay is a distillery, or let's say the family who owns it owns a distillery, they own a brewery, World Top Brewery, and they have quite a bit of land where they actually produce a lot of their own barley. What this means is that they are actually fully and actually grain to glass. I don't mean that they're buying their grain from a large manufacturer and then distilling it themselves, grinding it. It's pretty standard, typical whiskey practice these days. They're actually growing their own barley. And this gives them a lot more control over A, what beer they're making and what whiskey they're producing. I personally love this, not only for the control that they have, but also because this means if they're making beer, they know how to ferment. And if they know how to ferment, they know how to make a really good whiskey, which is a little bit different. Maybe there's different yeasts in there than what you typically get. Most Scottish distilleries use only one type of yeast, so you get a different product in this. What stands out, and I should mention, I have distilled IPA beer before. In Germany, it's called Bierbrenn, which means distilled beer, and it's not good. At least not the IPA version of it. I'm sure there's good Bierbrenn out there, but when you distill hops, it gets really bitter real quick, and it's not that enjoyable. So try to stay away from it. I mean, experiment with it, try it like I did, but you're probably not going to like it. These guys are quite interesting. And what they do is very cool. They have this marketing brochure, this kind of page on their website that goes through the processes and the steps that they take to fill a bottle or a batch. This is batch number 2 of their IPA finish. It's not just that they've taken a barrel that used to be at a brewery, their brewery, and filled it with whiskey. They do some things which stand out. For starters, we already talked about it, they make their own beer, and their own beer has a release which is released or aged in a whiskey barrel. So what they're doing is, of course, they're sourcing whatever top quality barrels they can. They're then filling it with their flagship whiskey, aging it for a handful of years. It's a young distillery, so we're not talking about long periods of time, or like 3 or so years, and then putting beer in there. This beer will then get finished, and once it is taken out, it will then be filled with whiskey. The key here is it's not taking them time to do this. What I mean by time, usually a distillery is going to have, or let's say a distillery working with a brewery, getting some barrels, is going to be emptying the barrel, shipping it, putting it in storage until it can get shipped. It's probably going to take a couple days, probably weeks, before any whiskey goes back into this barrel. What they do very differently is because they own the distillery and the brewery, they are filling this whiskey back in a ex-beer barrel within a matter of hours, meaning that they're getting as much of that beer flavor as they can and not letting that barrel age out or get too old. Very interesting, very cool, and on top of that, it means they are very much in control of knowing the beer that went in there, so the flavor profile that they can expect, and making sure that their blend or their batch that comes out of these barrels before it gets blended is very good, smooth and not overly beery, not overly hoppy. It's not an experiment they just tried, it's something they spent some time on and really rounded out. It's a very good product, in my opinion. Mainly because I've tried some bad stuff that I've made myself. So who is this for? Essentially, this bottle only at 46% ABV, not aged for a particularly long period of time. It is for, I would say, a whiskey fan who is maybe new to whiskey, but loves beer and likes IPA and likes that bitterness character that kind of comes with an IPA beer. Why do I say that? It's not overly bitter. You're not really, I mean, if you blind tasted this, you might pick up a little bit, but you're not going to be like, wow, this is beer in here. So it's very smooth, and it's a great transition from somebody moving from beer to whiskey. If you're a long-time single malt or whiskey advocate, this is a single malt whiskey, you're not going to be blown away by this. But, and you have a friend who likes beer but doesn't know a lot about whiskey, this is a great way to get them started, and hopefully something that they're going to enjoy. Not only because it's whiskey beer, tastes like beer, but because of how it's been produced and how the distillery has its roots in beer, and even longer than that, its roots in actual agriculture and growing of barley. There's a lot of marketing these days from distilleries talking about how grain to glass or farm to glass, and it's pretty tricky. It's amazing to see a distillery that's doing everything completely themselves, in-house, and there's no marketing or any gimmicks behind it. It's a new distillery, so I'm very excited to see what comes in the future. They have a whole bunch of special releases and things. I haven't had a chance to try a lot of them, only a handful, and I'm really excited to see what comes out next. Thank you, all you whiskey fans. Cheers to you and your next glass of whiskey. Bye now.